Dear students, now we start the second video on the transport in humans. This is the 5090 O-level biology syllabus, and we are talking of the 2021 syllabus, and this is the second video which precedes the video one which I have just completed. Now, as we go on to we're talking about the blood vessels, we talk of the artery first, and as I told you, aorta is the largest artery of the body. So the aorta and then all the branches of the aorta have, now if you look at the structure of the artery, here it is. The artery has a crinkled endothelium. The reason why, because it has muscle in its wall. So there's a muscle layer, which is the circular muscles which surround it. And then it has a layer of elastic tissue. Now, so that means this elastic tissue can stretch and recoil. So these are the two words that I want you to remember is when we talk of a muscle, we only say contract and relax. That's it. Please do not say anything else. So muscles can only contract and relax. But when we talk of the elastic tissue here, then we say elastic tissues can only stretch and recoil. Stretch and recoil. So please be very clear which words we use when. So muscles can only contract and relax. Elastic tissue can stretch and recoil. Now, what we have in the artery wall, we have number one, it's got a very thick wall. So the artery wall is very thick. Now that of course is why, because it can withstand high pressure. It can withstand high pressure. Now you have to understand why arteries carry blood at high pressure. Because basically all arteries arise from the aorta. And the aorta arises from the left ventricle. So you know the wall of the left ventricle is thicker. So when the wall of the left ventricle is thicker, that can exert more force. So more force is exerted. So blood in the aorta is at a very high pressure. And all arteries carry blood at high pressure. So the high pressure can only, the reason why we have a very thick wall of the artery, the thick wall of the artery means that it can withstand this high pressure. So all arteries arising from the aorta, of course we have the pulmonary artery which arises from the right ventricle, but that does carry blood at high pressure, but lesser high pressure than the ones which are rising from the aorta. Now, I want to talk a little more about the arteries. The reason why, because you've got to see here what we're talking about here, the artery. It's got a thick, elastic, muscular wall. So thick wall is to withstand high pressure. Small lumen is because it has blood is flowing at a higher resistance to pressures. The other hand, there's more resistance to the flow. Now, the muscle in the wall, which we have to understand, is the most important thing. The muscle in the wall, you see, you've got muscles in the wall. So the muscles can contract and relax, and they can alter the size of the lumen. Now, why would we want that? Basically, we want that is to divert blood flow. So the muscle in the wall of this, you can see the muscle layer in the wall. This is the muscle layer in the wall of the artery. I drew it here as well, the muscle in the wall of the artery. So you've got to understand is that basically we want to divert blood flow because you have 5 liters of blood in your body. And sometimes when you are exercising, say you are on the treadmill. Now when you are exercising and you're on the treadmill, you need more blood flowing to your leg muscles. But you need less blood flowing to your intestines and your stomach. So then the blood is going to be diverted from those parts and more blood is going to be flowing per unit time in your leg muscles so that more oxygen reaches there per unit time and more carbon dioxide is removed per unit time. So in order to divert blood flow, we have muscles in the wall of the arteries. If you've just had a meal, you need more blood going into your stomach and your intestines. And we don't want you to go and start exercising soon after a meal because the food needs to be digested and the blood is being diverted to your stomach and your intestines. So you should not go on to the treadmill. You can take a little while and then go on to the treadmill. So if you're on the treadmill, more blood is going to your leg muscles. I'm just giving you two different examples. One of the treadmill and one of when you've just had a very hearty meal. So after the meal is going to be diverted to the stomach and the intestines. If you're on the treadmill, it's going to be diverted to your leg muscles. So it will be the muscles in the wall of the artery. So in a certain area, the muscles will contract. So the lumen will become smaller. Or the muscles will relax, so the lumen will be larger. So you have two phenomena. Either the muscle contracting, because these are circular muscles, or the muscles relaxing, so the lumen becomes larger, or the lumen becomes smaller. So more blood flowing or less blood flowing. So the muscle has this role to play in the wall of the arteries. Now coming to the second blood vessel which I want to discuss here is the capillary, and you can see there is this capillary network, and it's the network which joins the system of tubes which joins an artery and a vein. And basically the function of the transport system takes place here. Like for instance, you've come to study in a school and you've come in your car. So if the doors don't open, you can't come out of the car and can't enter the school. So similarly, what is the transport system? It's carrying oxygen, it's carrying glucose, it's carrying carbon dioxide. But then that must come out of the blood. Now, nowhere else can it come out of the blood because the artery has a thick wall, the vein has a thick wall. The capillary is the only place which is one cell thick. So oxygen is going to diffuse out. Carbon dioxide is going to enter from the body cells into the blood. Similarly, glucose is going to diffuse in the intestines. The glucose is going to enter. And in the body cells, the glucose is going to diffuse out. So in different places, different structures will move in, different molecules will move in, and different molecules will move out. So everywhere in the body, carbon dioxide is going to enter the blood. So this red tube which I've made is the capillary, and the blood is flowing in this. So what is going to happen is that the oxygen is going to diffuse out. Yes, in the lungs, the oxygen is going to diffuse into the blood. So in the lungs, oxygen is going to diffuse into the blood. In the body cells, the oxygen is going to diffuse out of the blood into the body cells. So the capillary is that one cell thick, very, very interesting network of blood vessels where all the exchange of different substances is going to take place between the blood and the body cells. Of course, we again do a little more detail about that a little later. Now let's look at the third blood vessel, which is a vein. Now the vein is, as you can see, first we have the arteries, then we have the capillaries, and then finally we have the veins. Now the veins, you have to understand, is by the time the blood has reached the veins, it's lost a lot of pressure. And of course, it's lost a lot of fluid as well. So most of the fluid is seeped out and some of it has returned, but some of it may not have returned. So the volume is decreased now. So you have a large lumen, so less resistance to flow. So you have a large lumen, so less resistance to flow. Then you have valves, and these valves are going to prevent backflow, especially as I told you in your leg muscles. So it's going to prevent backflow. Now the fact that they have a thin wall, it's very interesting why they have a thin wall. Is the reason why, because you have skeletal muscles, like you keep on moving. When you're sitting also, you keep on moving your legs. When you're lying down or sleeping, even you move your legs. The reason is that the skeletal muscles sort of press on it and they do a sort of peristalsis so that the blood in the veins is helped to be transported upwards in your legs or wherever in your body. And this peristalsis action is actually on the thin walls of the veins. So the thin wall of the veins are helpful. If it had a thick wall, then the muscles would not be able to press on it. But because the veins have thin walls, so the skeletal muscles, these are the skeletal muscles which I've made in brown, and these skeletal muscles can press on them, and that's why you've got veins in between your leg muscles. And when you move your legs, it's these veins which are sort of pressed upon, and the blood is helped to return to the heart. Because you see, you have got to understand is the blood in the veins has now lost it's a lot of pressure and it's very low pressure. So veins, thin walls, so that the muscles can work on them. Then large lumen, so less resistance to flow. And the third factor is that they've got valves and this prevents backflow. Now coming to the structure of the blood, this got the liquid part, which is a yellowish part, which is called the plasma. And this yellowish part is what you can see here as well. And in this shorba or the liquid part, we have three types of cells. The first one is the red blood cell, which is a biconcave disc, and this contains the pigment hemoglobin. And basically, the function of the red blood cell is only and only to transport oxygen and transport oxygen from the lungs to the body cells. So the hemoglobin becomes oxyhemoglobin in the lungs, and then it gives up its oxygen and becomes deoxygenated. So hemoglobin, the pigment which is responsible for transporting oxygen, is inside. And please remember this hemoglobin is a protein, but it has an iron component. So a little part of it is made up of iron. Then we talk of cell fragments, which are called platelets, and these are responsible for the clotting mechanism. When you cut yourself and the blood comes in contact with the air, it clots, it coagulates, it solidifies, which means that it prevents further loss of blood and also the entry of pathogens. The white blood cells are of two types. Number one, phagocytes, and number two, lymphocytes. So phagocytes and lymphocytes, we have to understand how do they look like, how will we label something as phagocyte and how will we label something as lymphocyte. Now let's look at a diagram of the blood. It's a very nice diagram showing the blood. So the liquidy part is called the plasma, which has been labeled here, and then you can see the labeling of the blood vessel. And then we have three types of cells that they've shown you. Red blood cells and the platelets, which are cell fragments, as I said to earlier. So platelets, and then the white blood cells. The white blood cells are of two types. Number one is the phagocyte, and the second is the lymphocyte. Now, the phagocytes have granules in their cytoplasm. So the phagocytes have granules in their cytoplasm and they have a lobed nucleus. Now, this lobed nucleus is very easy to pick up. You can see it here also. You can see this here also. So the lobed nucleus, just like we have an ear lobe. So lobed nucleus. So please understand is that we're going to be talking of phagocyte, granules in the cytoplasm, lobe nucleus. Now, as opposed to that, a lymphocyte, which has not been drawn here in this diagram, a lymphocyte has a very large nucleus. Now, this is the large nucleus, which is inside it. I haven't shaded it, I shouldn't have written it, but that's not the correct way to label it. The correct way to is a label line that I should have given. So, large nucleus, and this is the nucleus which I'm just now coloring this, but you're not supposed to color it if you don't do this in the paper, please. And then it has a very thin rim of cytoplasm. It has a thin rim of cytoplasm. So cytoplasm is not in abundance, it is in a very smaller amount. So thin rim of cytoplasm, and that's the lymphocytes. And lymphocytes are actually responsible for making antibodies. We talk a lot about antibodies these days because of the coronavirus. And the phagocytes, what is their function? They do phagocytosis. And phagocytosis is engulfing and digesting any pathogen which might enter your body. Another diagram showing you the blood cells. So we've got the lymphocyte here, which you can see has a large nucleus. Then you can see these different, that's a neutrophil, which is also called a phagocyte, then the red blood cell, and then these are these cell fragments, which are the platelets. The rest of it is, I don't want you to be really worried about that. So lymphocyte, large nucleus, phagocyte, lobed nucleus, which is also called a neutrophil. So this is also called a phagocyte. Some of it because we do the labeling in a little different manner. And then the erythrocyte, or this is the red blood cell. So erythrocyte is a red blood cell, and red blood cell only transports oxygen. Phagocytes do phagocytosis. Lymphocytes produce antibodies. Okay? So this is what we have to understand about these blood cells. Next, let's discuss the what are the constituents of the plasma. The plasma is the liquid part or the watery part, and I'd say it's the shorba part of it is the liquid part, which contains, number one, it transports all the blood cells. Blood cells are the red blood cells and the white blood cells and the platelets. Then number two, it transports ions. You have sodium ions, chloride ions, potassium ions. All the body cells need all those ions. Then we have transports all the soluble food substances like amino acids. So all the soluble food substances, then hormones produced in the pancreas, transported to the liver, are carried in the plasma, in the liquid part of the blood. Then we have carbon dioxide in solution. Some carbon dioxide is transported by the red blood cell, but also a small amount is transported in the form of a solution form in the plasma. Then vitamins, if you had orange juice, vitamin C is going to enter the blood plasma and it's going to be carried in the blood plasma. If you just say blood, it's not going to be correct. You have to say blood plasma. Then the urea, which was produced in the liver, and then is removed by the kidneys. But how does it go from the liver to the kidneys? You've got to understand it has to be transported in the plasma. So the blood plasma contains urea, which was thrown in the liver, and then it was the kidney that was removed from the blood plasma. And the last one is the large plasma proteins. And one of the plasma proteins we're going to talk about is fibrinogen. Now please remember, these are large protein molecules, and these are important for a number of reasons. So the plasma, we have to know all these. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So the 8 constituents of the plasma have been given to you on this page, and you need to now remember these. We come to the role of platelets. Now platelets, of course, come into action whenever you cut your skin and the blood seems to come in contact with air at any point. Now they release an enzyme called thrombokinase. Now the thrombokinase causes one of the plasma proteins, prothrombin, to be converted to thrombin. And then the thrombin converts another plasma protein, which is called fibrinogen, into insoluble fibrin. And this insoluble fibrin forms a mesh. It forms these thread-like thingies, which helps the blood to clot because it traps the red blood cells and the blood coagulates. You see, from a liquid state, it goes into a solid state. And that's what we call blood clots. Now, that's very important that the blood should clot. The reason being is that this is going to prevent further loss of blood. So it's going to prevent excessive loss of blood. We all lose a little blood when we cut ourselves or we injure ourselves. So it prevents excessive blood loss. And number two, we want the prevent number one, because when there's a break in your skin, all the bacteria in the air can have a very start to reproduce there, and they grow there because your body temperature is ideal and there's a lot of glucose in your body cells. So number one, it prevents excessive loss of blood. Number two, it prevents the entry of pathogens, because the skin is the biggest organ of the body which protects you from all the pathogens. So basically the platelets are doing a very important role. Is when you ever have an injury, it is going to help the blood to clot, and this is going to prevent further loss of blood and also prevent the entry of pathogens. Then let's discuss the structure and functions of the red blood cells. The red blood cells are biconcave discs. They are biconcave discs. Now, this of course increases the surface area, and so this helps in the quick absorption of oxygen. Now, inside the red blood cells, we have a protein called hemoglobin. This hemoglobin combines with oxygen to form oxyhemoglobin. The hemoglobin molecule needs iron, and of course, it's a protein, so it is made up of a lot of amino acids. So, proteins are also needed, but I mean, we don't seem to remember it when we're talking of hemoglobin, and we only think of the iron part of it. So, amino acids needed to make it, and we need iron to make it. Now, inside the red blood cell, there is no nucleus. Now, that's in a way a good thing because there's more space for the hemoglobin molecule. But then it's a bad thing because it cannot repair. So, it has a very short lifespan. Red blood cells die every day because new ones have to be formed because they have a short lifespan as they do not have a nucleus. They do have a nucleus initially in the bone marrow, but once they are thrown into the bloodstream, they do not have. When they mature, they lose their nucleus. So the oxyhemoglobin and besides the structure of it, it has a very elastic cell membrane. So this can stretch and recoil. So the same red blood cell can become a little longer by stretching, and then it can resume its shape when it is in a larger blood vessel. Then it has a spongy cytoplasm. The reason why, because when it's passing through these narrow blood vessels, it can squeeze through them. So the red blood cell and the function basically transporting oxygen in the form of oxyhemoglobin. Now, the last topic in this video is coronary heart disease. And it says in your syllabus, describe coronary heart disease. Now, first of all, what we have to understand is what is coronary artery. The coronary artery is this blood vessel which is coming out of the aorta. As soon as the aorta comes out of the heart, there is a vessel which comes out which is called the coronary artery. So, this is the coronary artery which I have just labeled. Now, the coronary artery supplies the muscle in the wall of the heart. And this is a normal artery, just like other arteries. But what can happen is that there can be a blockage in it. Now, if there is a blockage in it somewhere, well, let's see somewhere here. Now, what is going to happen is that the part of the heart muscle ahead of it, this part cannot receive glucose and oxygen. So, this portion of the heart muscle is going to die. Now, the heart will be unable to work effectively because if portions of it have died, then the heart muscle as a whole cannot work. So, coronary heart disease is when the coronary arteries or blood vessels or branches of the coronary artery get blocked because of fat deposition. So, fat is deposited in the coronary arteries and in the wall of the coronary arteries, not in the lumen, please remember that. And that results in a portion of the heart muscle not receiving enough glucose and oxygen, so not respiring and thus dying. Now, the causes which are listed are number one, diet. Diet's very rich in saturated fats, which is all animal fats. Then stress, people who have a very stressful life, they produce a lot of adrenaline. And this adrenaline results in vasoconstriction and high blood pressure and increases chances of a heart attack. So, number one, diet, increase in saturated fat intake. Number two, stress. If you have a very stressful job, or if you have a very stressful environment at home or wherever you work, that is going to result in the more chances of you having a heart attack. And the third is smoking. Smoking, of course, contains nicotine, which is bad. And nicotine, of course, results in vasoconstriction, blood vessels narrowing, more chances of the fat deposition, platelets become sticky. So all those factors predispose to more chances of getting coronary heart disease or blockage of the coronary arteries. This is another very interesting diagram on atherosclerosis. Atherosclerosis is this fat deposition. And what happens is that you can see here the fat is deposited in the wall of the arteries. Now, of course, this is going to reduce the lumen. So the lumen is going to be reduced, and you see this big fat being deposited in the wall of the artery, and this is resulting in a sort of a speed breaker. And this is the normal human artery, and this is the artery narrowed by atherosclerotic plaque. And what happens is the lining of this arteries are called endothelium. Endothelium is the lining. Endo is usually a word we use a lot in like in the uterus there is the endometrium. So the endothelium is the lining, and you see how the lining is being pushed up, and then of course it is damaged, and when it's damaged there's more chances of the blood clotting in those areas because now it becomes a roughened surface. So damaged endothelium, you can see this here. So damaged endothelium is going to result in more chances of blood clots happening here, and if a blood clot happens here, well, this is going to further block this. So we have the muscle in the wall of the arteries, and then you can see how the fat is being deposited in the wall of the arteries, and that of course results in narrower lumen, and that of course increases blood pressure. So if the blood pressure is increased, you know those are bad things, and they are in the long term they're going to damage the heart as well, because the heart has to work harder to pump blood in these narrowed blood vessels. So please understand these are the diagrams which I have put in for you. And with this we come to an end of the second video, and another third video will explain the rest of this chapter. Thank you.